Zinzi was a strikingly beautiful young woman known throughout her town. Her charm and grace caught the eye of Thabo, the wealthiest man in the town, as they were planning their wedding ceremony. Despite being madly in love, Zinzi felt unworthy of Thabo's lavish lifestyle. To make matters worse, she had no money to afford the extravagant wedding dress she dreamed of wearing. Zinzi knew Thabo's family would expect a grand ceremony with everything perfect. As the days passed, the pressure weighed on her. Her thoughts kept returning to how her lack of wealth could embarrass Thabo and disappoint his family. She grew desperate, knowing her pride couldn't bear the judgment. One day, while walking through the neighboring town, she noticed Dlamini, a wealthy older man notorious for his questionable dealings. He had a reputation for offering money to young women, and Zinzi made a bold decision approaching him. She offered herself in exchange for the money she needed for her dress. With a trembling voice, Zinzi asked Dlamini for the money she needed. She hated what she was about to do, but felt trapped in her desire to meet expectations. Dlamini's smile widened as he handed her the money, knowing that Zinzi's sacrifice would haunt her forever. The next day, Zinzi went to the market and bought the wedding dress of her dreams, an extravagant, flowing gown. Her friends gasped when they saw it, but no one knew the shameful price she had paid to afford it. On the outside, she looked happy and excited, but inside, she was drowning in guilt. As the wedding day approached, Zinzi tried to hide her growing anxiety. Every time she looked at the dress, she was reminded of her shameful secret. Thabo, oblivious to her inner conflict, was excited for the big day, thinking Zinzi's happiness matched his own. On the day of the wedding, Zinzi wore the dress with grace, but her heart was heavy with guilt. As she walked down the aisle, she felt every step pulling her deeper into the web of her lies. Still, she smiled for Thabo, knowing this was the moment she dreamed of, but at what cost? As the ceremony ended and they became husband and wife, Zinzi's guilt only grew. That night, as Thabo kissed her, all she could think about was the secret she had hidden from him. She feared that one day he would find out, and everything she had worked so hard to build would come crashing down. Zinzi's worst nightmare came true when Dlamini showed up at her house a few weeks after the wedding. He demanded more from her, money or more favors, or he would reveal their deal to Thabo. Zinzi was trapped, knowing that if Thabo discovered the truth, her marriage would be over. Desperate, Zinzi begged Dlamini to keep quiet, but he refused. She found herself caught between two impossible choices: either find a way to pay Dlamini off, or risk losing everything she held dear. As the days passed, Zinzi's guilt weighed heavier on her heart. She became distant from Thabo, her once joyful laughter replaced with silence. Thabo noticed the change but couldn't understand why. He felt her slipping away, but Zinzi couldn't bring herself to confess. Zinzi decided to confront Dlamini one final time. She offered him all the money she had saved, begging him to leave her alone. But Dlamini had no interest in her money. He wanted more than that. He wanted to see her fall. With no other options left, Zinzi found herself at a crossroads. She could confess everything to Thabo and face the consequences, or she could continue living in fear, hoping that Dlamini wouldn't follow through on his threats. As Zinzi stood there, lost in thought, Thabo approached her. He had followed her, sensing something was wrong. Zinzi turned to face him, her eyes filled with tears, knowing that she couldn't keep the truth from him any longer. Zinzi fell to her knees, confessing everything. She told Thabo about Dlamini, the deal she made, and the shame she had carried with her since that fateful night. Her tears flowed freely as she begged for his forgiveness. Thabo's heart broke as he listened. He had loved Zinzi with all his soul, and her betrayal felt like a dagger to his chest. But as she spoke, he could see her torment and the fear that had driven her to this dark path. After a long silence, Thabo finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zinzi looked up, her face soaked with tears, unable to answer. How could she explain that she had been too afraid of losing him? Thabo, though heartbroken, pulled Zinzi into his arms. He knew that love was complicated and sometimes people made mistakes. He held her tightly, both of them crying together. Zinzi was shocked that he still held her, even after everything. But the problem wasn't just Zinzi's guilt, it was Dlamini. He still held power over her, and the threat of exposing her secret loomed large. Thabo, now determined to protect his wife, decided to confront Dlamini himself. The next day, Thabo went to Dlamini's house, confronting the older man. "You will leave my wife alone," he said with a calm but firm voice. Dlamini, surprised by Thabo's boldness, tried to brush him off, but Thabo stood his ground. Thabo made it clear that if Dlamini continued to harass Zinzi, there would be consequences. For the first time, Dlamini realized that he had underestimated Thabo's love for Zinzi. He decided it wasn't worth the trouble and backed down. With Dlamini no longer a threat, Zinzi felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Thabo had forgiven her, and together they had overcome the dark secret that had threatened to destroy their marriage. Zinzi knew she was lucky to have a man who loved her so deeply, despite her mistakes. The ordeal had taught Zinzi an important lesson. She realized that love wasn't about perfection or grand gestures. It was about trust, honesty, and standing by each other through thick and thin. She vowed never to hide anything from Thabo again. In the end, Zinzi and Thabo's love grew stronger because of the challenges they had faced together. Their story became a testament to the power of forgiveness and the strength of true love. The moral of Zinzi's story is clear. Love can conquer even the deepest regrets, but it is built on trust and honesty. No secret is worth the pain it can cause, and no mistake is too big to forgive if the love is real. This is just one of the many tales that lie hidden in the shadows. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to African Mystic Folktales.